It's Joel and I look so happy because at that moment I was. You know, he was being nice to me. And it was nice when he was being nice. This right here is the Joel I loved. And I guess that's the Joel I didn't want to lose. Like, I didn't think, like, the things that happened in the future was gonna happen to me. I really didn't think. Like, to be honest, like, I couldn't have imagined what was he capable of. I honestly didn't think he would do the things he did to me. I was about 16, 17 whenever I first saw Joel. He was my brother's friend. He would drive by on his motorcycle on a wheelie, and it caught my eye. I found him very attractive. He would make me laugh. Like, he caught my attention with that. Like, he would always make me laugh. There was an attraction there, but it was like I didn't entertain it. I didn't think about dating him until like years later. That's my baby. That's my son, Christopher. He just got his spinal tap in this picture. My daddy passed away from cancer in 2013. And then 9 months later, my son was diagnosed with leukemia, which is a blood cancer. And it was really hard. You know, I didn't know if my son was gonna make it. And I prayed. I prayed to God to save my son. I was at my lowest, and I was alone, I was scared. And that's when he kind of crawled his way in. Me and my son were in the hospital for one of his hospital stays. Joel ended up messaging me. He would just ask me how Chris was doing and how am I doing, how am I handling it. I needed somebody to be there for me, and he was that person. You know, like when we first started messaging, I was sitting on the couch looking out by the hospital window crying and, looking at my son, and it was hard. And then I hear a ding, and then I started like smiling at my phone. And he's messaging me, "Hey, beautiful. Oh my goodness, I seen the picture you posted today. You look so beautiful." And so that's what got my attention. That's where I started falling in love with him. After we started dating, he would come to the hospital with me, and he would actually stay in the hospital. He was my knight in shining armor. He would always call me his queen, and he would always say, every king needs his queen. And my kids loved him. I did feel it fall very, very hard for Joel. And it wasn't just he was like my best friend. Like, he knew me, I knew him. We were actually having a great day, and we were out swimming, and we were having such a good time.
Come here. Come here.
And then he thinks it's hilarious to grab my shoulders and just hold me under. And I'm sitting here splashing the water, trying to get him off me. I was trying, to kick my legs, but my legs were wrapped around him, and he had me pressed up against him and holding my shoulders down. When I was underneath the water, I really couldn't see very much. But then when he let go, he has like this huge smile on his face. His eyes were like lit up, and he's just laughing so hard. Joel thinks it's hilarious. Like he fed off of it, basically. It wasn't just like giggles and everything. He enjoyed it. He got high off of it. It was his reality. And he just was like beaming. It made him so happy. Him causing me so much pain. One day, him and I were at my mom's, and he ended up messaging this girl. And supposedly, she's just a friend. And I had an issue with that. And I'm like, why are you in the bedroom messaging her? And that is when he took and grabbed me by my shoulders, and he was yelling at me in my face, and then all of a sudden he took and just headbutted me. And then knocked me down. And I felt this instant pain in the middle of my forehead. And he got on top of me. I was scared when he was on top of me. He was angry, and his eyes, they go black. And to this day, that his face still haunts me. I wasn't looking at Joel. I was looking at that evil demon that he had in him. After he headbutted me, it was a totally different person. The person I seen on top of me. And, I'm hurting, and I'm scared. And he has this smirk on his face. And it was pure evil. I knew right then I was looking at the devil. But then my nephew ended up banging on the door. And then that got Joel off of me. And Joel ended up leaving. When it was good, it was great. And that's what I was holding on to. I did see hope in him. I didn't want to give up on him. I loved him enough to stay, and I just couldn't give up on him. He was saying he was sorry, that it won't happen again. He loves me. He can't live without me. I was still hoping that, maybe he will come around. Maybe things will be different, and just give him a little bit more time, I don't want to give up on him just yet. I loved him, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna fight for this love. We would be laying in the bed and, watching our phones. And he would just be over there just watching violent videos. Joel would laugh, and he'd like, look, babe, he got his jaw broken. Or, look, babe, look, his blood is coming out of his head. One hit, watch this hit. All it took was one hit to open his skin up. I honestly think he liked the gore of it, like the blood and someone being in pain. Like, he loved when somebody was in pain. And I look at it and I'm like, that's just not funny. Like, what are you doing? And I look at him and he has like, you know how when you see a newborn puppy, you're like, it's so cute, you're smiling. That is how he was like. But it was gruesome. It gave him relief. Like, you know, watching somebody get pain caused to them. Like, he enjoyed it. I felt disgusted. And like I thought he was demented to look at that and like get off on that. They're just wondering, you know, what was wrong with them. And it was just awful. He started telling me that his grandfather was mowing one day and he found little bunnies in like a tall area of the grass. And he picked the bunnies up, and then as his grandfather came around with a lawnmower, he threw the bunnies in front of the lawnmower and they got ran over. And he enjoyed seeing like the bunny parts and the blood splatter out from the lawnmower. And Joel just thought it was funny. At first, Joel's laugh was like his normal laugh. And then like after he saw like the disgusted look on my face, it turned into like an evil laugh. Like, you know how you see in the cartoons, like the bad guy, they laugh? That's how he laughed. Joel loved violence. I think that causing somebody pain, like you can control how bad that person hurts. And I think he really enjoyed like the pain of it. There was like two sides to Joel. There was the caring, sweet, but then there was a demon Joel. And it seemed like the longer he was the sweet Joel, the harder the demon would come out. I really honestly thought my love could fix him. I thought my prayers could fix him. He would be asleep next to me, and I would pray for whatever, you know, he's fighting, like that he can overcome it. And I told God to please, like, help Joel get through this. Like, Lord, I don't know what all he's going through, but I also understand something is obviously going on with him. That he's battling demons that I don't know of, that he's not speaking of. And I wanted Joel to get better, and I asked God to make Joel better. And the Joel that I fell in love with will eventually be the Joel that he is. But in reality, the Joel that I fell in love with was just a mask. One day we were driving down the road and he was just being ugly to me. And I told him to pull over because I didn't want to go home. And I undo my seatbelt and open the door. And as I get the door opened, he takes off. This is the road rash I got because of Joel. I took this picture because I kind of wanted, I guess, to remind myself of what he did. And like, I remember him like laughing, that evil laugh and that smirk he had on his face. And when I slipped, that's when I got the road rash. It was like his videos that he used to watch, like the gore and like the blood. And That's what I guess he got so excited for, because his videos that he used to watch and love to watch happened in real life, and he got to see it firsthand. He took me to the hospital. He told me to tell him I wrecked a scooter, and that's what I did. He never apologized. He thought it was funny.
So why did you cover for him?
I just didn't want him in trouble. And so I lied. Joel knew I loved him, and Joel knew I wasn't going anywhere. And no matter what he did, I was always going to be there.
One thing we haven't talked about is the tattoo on your neck.
Yeah. It says always with his initials right here. I did make a promise to myself. I'm like, well, I'm never going to leave you. I love you. I would tell him, be like, I love you. He's like, I love you too. And he would say forever, and I would say always. And I personally don't like neck tattoos, but he wanted it on my neck. He's like, get it on your neck. I was like, no, let me do it on my arm. And he's like, no, get it on your neck. I really honestly believe that he made it on my neck so other people can know that I guess I'm his property. I belong to him. And in his sick way, it was like a pleasure for him, because not only did he mark me on my neck where he would strangle the life out of me. The kids are mostly with me. Occasionally they would go to their dads. He would get them every other weekend. And I remember one day I was at home and I said I was leaving and I was gonna go to my mom's. And then Joel comes in and he got in front of me. He was like, no, you're not. I'm like, yeah, I am.
I'm not letting you go.
And he ended up pushing me to the ground. And then he straddled me. And he ended up started choking me. His eyes went dark. That face still haunts me in my dreams because I still see him. And I passed out. And then I wake up and I was very confused because when he first knocked me down, I had my pants on. And of course, I don't remember him taking it off. I don't know how long I was out for. I don't know what he did to me. But you only have your pants off for one reason, so. He really enjoyed being able to, I guess, control me like that. And he got pleasure from it. So he started doing it more often. It got to the point where it was at least 3 times a week I was getting strangled until I was unconscious. And some weeks it was more. It was like an addiction that he needed, that he enjoyed, that it got him high, that he could push me this close. And, I didn't die. And, he would hold my throat a little bit longer each time. And then it got to the point that I was passing out. And, you think about it. He's strangling me. And it's just a moment of seconds before you pass out and then you die. And that's scary. It was really scary. It was torture, and he got off on the torture, and he liked the fact that he was in charge of it. I do believe that he was seeing how close I can get to death. Every time he did it, when I was looking in his eyes, it was like a demon I seen. I didn't see Joe Whopper. It was pure evil. to tell my mom what was going on. I wanted to tell my brother what was going on. I felt bad because they thought I didn't want to be around them. And that's not the case at all. I wanted to go around them and I wanted to explain what all the hell I went through and that I was going through. But I couldn't. Quite a few times he would say that he would hurt my mom just to hurt me. That was the only way he could hurt me is to hurt her. He was always afraid that my mom would be able to talk me out of staying with him. And so he really didn't like me talking to her, especially before, if I was talking to her, he had to be right there. I think he was more afraid of what I was telling my mom. He's blowing his cover, I guess. It was damn it if I do, damn if I don't. I figured, if I stayed, they could end up killing me. But if I left, it's not just me anymore, it's my mom.
I've had it with you, Joel. I'm not doing this anymore.
One day, Joel and I were arguing, and I told him I was going to leave. And he's like, no, you're not. I'm like, yes, I am. I'm tired of this, Joel. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. Well, I'm in the bathroom, and there's no way for me to get out. And he got mad, and he knocked me down, and I fell into the tub. And that's when he turned the water on. And he was holding the shower head in my face and making the tub fill up with water. He's holding me under, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I was afraid I was gonna drown, and my kids were there at the time. I was scared because I didn't want my kids to see me that way. But then my son started knocking on the door and said, what's going on?
Hello?
That's when he stopped, and it was the fun, loving Joel. He took and threw me a towel. He didn't do anything in front of anybody. Joel would only hit me behind closed doors. It seemed like each time he was physical with me, the next time he was gonna top that. He was honestly pushing to see how far he could actually take it. He had to go a little further or he didn't get enjoyment out of it. He wanted more and more and more. And each time got rough and scarier. And he would hold my throat a little bit longer each time. He was seeing how close I can get to death. We went fishing a few times, and then all of a sudden, he comes up behind me and grabs me at my shoulders. And it's right here in my ear. And that's when he sits there and says that, he can dump me in this pond and nobody will ever find me. And turns me to face him. So I'm looking at him, and he does this little smirk he would do. And he told me that he was going to kill me and dump me in a pond and nobody will ever see me again. He's going to say that I got hooked on drugs and that I ran off with a dealer. He's like, they're never going to see you again. And then he let me go. It was like nothing happened. He was just telling me, oh, the fish are biting over here. And my heart kind of fell out of my chest. And I wanted to think he was playing, but deep down I knew he was dead serious.
Tell me what this is.
This is a picture of the cage I was in. And right here is my son's jacket that Joel made me hold. He told me to hold this jacket while you die, bitch, because you're never gonna see your kids again. I'm sitting in the living room, and he sees me on the phone, and he just gets that evil look in his eyes, like, who is she talking to? And he accused me of talking to another man. And I get off the phone with her, and I'm like, why did you do that? I go, I was on the phone with my mom. He's like, huh? I go, I was on the phone with mama. I'm like, why are you doing that? He's like, sure you were talking to your mom. I go, you know what? I'm tired of this, Joe. I'm leaving. And he ends up grabbing my head and slamming it into the door frame. And my phone actually called my mom. And she heard me say, Joel, you made me bleed. And like blood is pouring all over my face. You know, I can feel it. He told me that since I'm gonna act like a bitch, I'm gonna get treated like a bitch. He locked me in my dog's cage. And a short time later, I heard drilling. And I immediately was like, oh, he is screwing screws in the door. He is keeping me in this house. And that's when, I was already scared, but that's when I became terrified. I'm like, how is he gonna finish me? Like, is he just gonna let me lay here and bleed to death? Is he gonna strangle me? Well, as I'm hearing him screw screws in the door, you know, I love crime shows. So I know that they would spray like luminol and it would light up. So I took the blood on my forehead. I wrote on the wall, in my own blood, he killed me. So I was like, I need to let them know, hey, I didn't run off. And nobody would be able to find out where I'm at. And he said it before that he will take and dispose of my body in a pond, and he would tell my family that I ran off. Just as I got done writing, and then I kind of like put my back to the wall, and he sits on the edge of the bed and is just watching me. I didn't want him to like prolong it. I didn't want him to just like make me suffer. I didn't want him to continue to torture me. So I was just saying, please God, just let it be fast. And that my dad could come and get me and take me home. And I kind of go unconscious again. And I hear my mom. I hear her go, Christy, baby girl. And I hear pounding. If my phone didn't call my mom, I would be in a pond right now.
Where's he at? Walter! Christy, come to the door! Christy! Christy, come to the door! Joe! Joe! Search him.
Dude, y'all like really treat me like I did this. I put it on everything I love. That's what happened. Dude, I put it on God.
Okay, I'm glad.
Y'all don't believe me. She started slamming her hand in the door.
All right, get in the car. Get in the car.
Watch your back.
I've never seen that clip before.
How does he look to you?
He looks like an evil prick. He doesn't look remorseful. He's not sorry. He might be sorry that he didn't get to finish what he started, but that's the only thing he's sorry about. The doctors said that with all the head injuries that Joel caused and all the times he would strangle me until I was unconscious caused me to have brain damage. They didn't think that they would be able to fix me. They sent me to a nursing home to die closer to my family. They told my mom that I most likely would not make it. And if I did make it, I would never get out of bed again. I'm really scared because I was only like 35, I think, at this point. And, you know, I wanted to watch my kids grow up. You know, I wanted to still be a mom. I got very angry that Joel did this. That's when, I guess, like the spell he had over me broke. Joel's sister reached out to me. She wrote, "I was telling my friend who knew Joel as a kid the history of his abuse, and he was shocked. It ends with you, but there's a long line of women who were subject to his abuse. Me, both his grandmothers, his previous ex-girlfriends, and now I'm hearing about his sister, his cousin, and his aunt." His older sister told me that he ended up pushing his grandmother down the stairs. And there was one incident where he was arguing with his grandmother, and his grandfather, I guess, stepped in. And that's when Joel hit him in the head with a trophy. I knew I was gonna have to testify, and I knew seeing him was gonna be like really hard. And to be honest, it made me sick, the thought of seeing him again. I didn't want to see him. But like, after finding out, you know, that he did that to his grandmother and other members of his family, you know, it made me more confident in myself, and like was crystal clear I needed to do what I needed to do to get him in prison for as long as possible. And looking back, you know, how I said, like, there was like a demon in him. And there truly was a demon in him. He's dangerous to everyone. Like, nobody's safe around Joel. And, like, you know, I realized I wasn't his first, but I made sure I was his last. And nobody's gonna get hurt by the hands of Joel Lawfer again. He was sentenced to 50 years, 11 months, and 29 days in prison.
That's a long time.
Yes, it is a very long time.
When you say that, you have a smile on your face.
Because he can't hurt me anymore. And it's not really just about me. He can't hurt another woman like he hurt me. I rely on my mom a lot, and sometimes it's hard because she's supposed to rely on me. You know, it's supposed to be the other way around. And here I am, 39 years old, having to have my mom help me with like things I should be able to do on my own. Sometimes I lose my balance a lot, and then I think a lot of it is also anxiety. It's honestly still like putting a toll on me. I had really, really bad nightmares about him, and I still do. Like just the other day, I try to get up and run. And like I have them nightmares that, like, you know, if you're dreaming inside of a dream, like you wake up and he's still there. To be honest, I hate looking at myself because my body like physically changed since Joel, and like it's hard to miss this huge neck tattoo. And it's just like a constant reminder of what all he put me through. And it reminds me of all the times he strangled me. So it's hard to look at. I do think about wanting to get it covered up. I've actually got a design for it. Purple is for domestic violence color. So I want purple in there, and hopefully one day I'll be able to do it. I have a lot of emotions, you know, it's nice to get it out. Like, it's good to finally, you know, get it off my chest because, you know, I've been holding it for 5 years. It's difficult, but it's nice to finally be able to express and say everything he's done. I just think of how I used to be and how I miss the old Christy. And she's never coming back. But I'm thanking God now for letting me survive, you know, allowing me to still be with my kids. I was gone for 2 years, and I'm finally home. So instead of, please God, will you, it's thank you, God, for everything you've done.
Policemen are supposed to be good people, you know. They're supposed to be. My mom, she was in love with the man, tried to get her to stop, but she stayed by him.
It was a bombshell when the killer turned out to be a sheriff's deputy, David Keith Rogers.
There is a profound and fragile illusion that exists in some of the most isolated corners of the world, a deeply held belief that physical distance from the mainland equates to a distance from its modern tragedies. In the heart of the South Pacific, American Samoa has long been defined by this very tranquility. It is an unincorporated territory of the United States, a collection of volcanic islands draped in emerald rainforests and surrounded by the endless, deep blue expanse of the ocean. For generations, the cultural fabric here has been woven with the threads of traditional respect, communal ties, and a profound sense of shared humanity. It is a place where everyone knows everyone, where family lineages intersect, and where the concept of neighbor extends far beyond the physical boundaries of a property line. In such a society, the mechanisms of law and order often operate differently than they do in the sprawling, anonymous concrete jungles of the continental United States. Here, authority has historically been derived not from the barrel of a firearm, but from mutual respect and cultural reverence. This deeply ingrained culture of peace shaped the very foundation of the local law enforcement apparatus. By the year 2010, the American Samoa Department of Public Safety operated under a mandate that would seem entirely unfathomable, if not outright perilous, to any police officer patrolling the streets of Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York. According to the laws and regulations governing the territory at that time, standard patrol officers and detectives carrying out their routine duties were strictly prohibited from carrying firearms. Their primary tools of enforcement, defense, and public protection were limited merely to a standard-issue baton and a pair of steel handcuffs. This policy was not born out of a lack of resources, but rather out of a conscious, culturally rooted philosophy. The overarching belief among the populace and the lawmakers was that gun violence was an anomaly, an external plague that simply did not belong on their shores. The people of American Samoa believed that their tight-knit community structure, combined with their traditional values, acted as a natural deterrent to the kind of senseless, lethal violence that plagued the outside world. Therefore, arming the police was viewed not only as unnecessary, but perhaps as an affront to the peaceful nature of the island itself. To wear the badge in American Samoa meant stepping into the line of duty armed primarily with one's voice, one's presence, and one's ability to de-escalate conflict through mutual understanding. It required a unique breed of law enforcement officer, one who understood that their greatest shield was the respect they commanded within the community. No one embodied this ethos more profoundly than Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. At 44 years old, Lieutenant Brown was the quintessential public servant. He was a veteran of the force, having dedicated 19 years of his life to the Department of Public Safety. 19 years is a considerable tenure in any profession, but in law enforcement, it is a lifetime of bearing witness to the flaws, the mistakes, and the darker moments of the human condition. Yet, despite nearly 2 decades of confronting crime and disorder, Lieutenant Brown remained a figure of immense respect. He was widely regarded by both his fellow officers and the civilian population as a man of profound dedication and mild-mannered temperament. He was not a man who sought conflict, nor did he escalate it when it arrived at his doorstep. Instead, he navigated the complexities of his job with a calm demeanor that naturally diffused tension. His colleagues looked up to him not just for his experience, but for his unwavering steadiness. In a community where personal relationships often intersected with professional duties, Lieutenant Brown managed to enforce the law without alienating the people he swore to protect. He represented the very best of what the unarmed policing philosophy hoped to achieve. He was a guardian of the peace who maintained order through the sheer force of his character and the widespread respect he had cultivated over 2 decades of selfless service. He understood the risks inherent in his profession, yet he walked his beat every single day trusting in the unwritten social contract of his island home. He trusted that reason would prevail over rage, and that the cultural bonds of his people would protect him just as fiercely as he protected them. However, the devastating reality of human nature is that it only takes one moment of unchecked, blinding fury to shatter decades of peaceful tradition. The belief that geographic isolation provides immunity from extreme violence is ultimately a comforting myth. Violence, particularly violence born out of perceived injustice and deep-seated familial loyalty, knows no borders. It does not respect cultural philosophies, and it certainly does not care if the person standing in its way is armed or defenseless. The tragedy that would soon unfold would brutally expose the fatal flaw in the territory's law enforcement protocols, demonstrating with heartbreaking clarity that when tradition clashes with modern criminality, tradition is often the first casualty. The epicenter of this impending tragedy was located in the village of Fagatogo, the downtown hub of the territory. The judicial system of American Samoa was operating out of a temporary high court facility, which was situated on the lower level of the GHC Reed building in the nearby area of Malaloa. This was a place meant for the civilized resolution of disputes, a sanctuary where the rule of law was supposed to supersede personal vendettas. The architecture of the building, the formal proceedings inside the courtroom, the presence of the judge and the jury, all of it was designed to contain the chaotic elements of human conflict within a structured, safe environment. But the structures built by men are only as strong as the willingness of the people to abide by them. When a mind becomes consumed by vengeance, a courthouse ceases to be a temple of justice and transforms merely into a stage for retribution. The morning of July 22, 2010, began like countless other tropical mornings in American Samoa. The air was thick with humidity, the ocean breeze carrying the familiar sense of salt and damp earth. Inside the temporary high court, however, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The legal machinery was grinding toward the conclusion of a highly volatile criminal trial. The defendant in this trial had been facing serious charges, including allegations of severe assault and the illegal possession of weapons. The details of the original crime had already fractured relationships and drawn deep, bitter lines between the families involved. In a society where family honor and loyalty are paramount, a trial of this nature is never just a legal proceeding. It is a deeply personal, emotionally charged event where the stakes feel absolute. For days, the tension had been simmering just beneath the surface. The families of both the accused and the victims had packed into the vicinity, their emotions hanging heavy in the confined spaces of the GHC Reed building. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, a delicate situation that required the utmost vigilance from the authorities. Because of the heightened emotional state of the attendees, the Department of Public Safety had dispatched a detail of officers to maintain order and ensure the safety of everyone present. Among those tasked with standing the line that morning was Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. Alongside 2 other officers, his duty was to secure the perimeter, manage the crowds, and serve as a physical deterrent against any potential outbursts of violence. Standing his post outside the courtroom doors, Lieutenant Brown wore his uniform with the same quiet dignity he had displayed for 19 years. He was equipped exactly as the law dictated. Hanging from his belt was his standard-issue baton and his metal handcuffs. There was no firearm. There was no lethal means of defense to protect himself or his fellow officers should the situation escalate beyond the realm of verbal negotiation or basic physical restraint. He was a human shield, armed only with the authority of his badge and the expectation that the citizens passing by him would honor the sanctity of the court. He stood in the narrow hallway, the embodiment of a peaceful philosophy that was about to be violently tested. Inside the courtroom, the climax of the trial had finally arrived. The jury, having deliberated on the evidence presented to them, had reached a verdict. The judge called the court to order, the room falling into a heavy, suffocating silence as the decision was read aloud. The verdict was not guilty. The defendant was acquitted on all charges, completely cleared of the accusations of assault and weapons possession. The legal system had spoken, but the translation of that verdict in the minds of the victim's family was not one of justice served, but of a catastrophic, unbearable failure. The pronouncement of innocence acted as the ultimate catalyst, igniting a devastating chain reaction of grief, disbelief, and ultimately, an uncontrollable, murderous rage. As the reality of the acquittal washed over the room, the fragile constraints of civilization began to snap. The family of the original victim felt a profound, searing betrayal. In their eyes, the system had failed to hold a violent offender accountable. The structured environment of the court, the legal jargon, the finality of the judge's gavel, none of it mattered anymore. The only thing that remained was a burning, primitive desire to balance the scales on their own terms. The courtroom doors swung open, and the crowd began to spill out into the hallway and the exterior lobby area of the GHC Reed building. The atmosphere had instantly shifted from tense anticipation to volatile chaos. Standing in the path of this overwhelming emotional storm was Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. He watched the doors open, observing the faces of the people pouring out. He had seen the anger of disappointed families before. It was an occupational hazard he had managed countless times over his long career. He prepared himself to do what he always did, to calm the crowd, to direct traffic, to offer a steady, authoritative presence to prevent any physical altercations from breaking out in the immediate aftermath of the ruling. He had no way of knowing that the philosophy of unarmed peace he had served for 2 decades was already dead. He had no way of knowing that the threat walking toward him could not be reasoned with, could not be intimidated by a badge, and could not be stopped by a wooden baton. The Pacific breeze continued to blow outside, unaware that the territory of American Samoa was mere seconds away from losing its innocence forever, and that the long, distinguished life of a dedicated guardian was about to be cut violently short in the name of a senseless vengeance. The moment the verdict of not guilty resonated through the heavy air of the temporary high court, a palpable shift occurred, a silent fracture in the collective composure of those gathered. For the family of the original victim, the words spoken by the jury did not represent the closing of a chapter or the administration of justice. Rather, they felt like a visceral blow, a profound denial of their suffering. In the immediate seconds following the pronouncement, the courtroom became a crucible of suppressed emotion. The rigid formalities of the legal system, the polished wood of the benches, the authoritative presence of the judge, All of it seemed to dissolve into a meaningless backdrop against the overwhelming tide of personal grief and searing anger. The proceedings had concluded, but the conflict had merely been displaced, pushed from the structured environment of the legal arena out into the vulnerable, unpredictable space of the public lobby. As the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung outward, the attendees began to filter out into the corridors of the GHC Reed building in Malaloa. The atmosphere was incredibly dense, suffocating under the weight of unexpressed outrage. People moved with a stiff, unnatural cadence, their faces drawn tight with a mixture of disbelief and a simmering, dangerous hostility. The murmurs of the crowd were low and strained, a collective exhalation of frustration that filled the narrow confines of the building. Standing watch over this tense exodus was Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. Positioned strategically to observe and manage the flow of the exiting crowd, he remained the anchor of calm in a rapidly destabilizing environment. His eyes, trained by 19 years of dedicated service, scanned the faces of the individuals passing by, reading their body language, searching for any signs of imminent physical confrontation. He was acutely aware of the bitter disappointment harbored by the losing side of the trial, and his primary objective was to ensure that this disappointment did not manifest into violence within the halls of the courthouse. He stood tall, projecting an aura of composed authority, his uniform a symbol of the peaceful order he was sworn to protect. Attached to his duty belt were his baton and handcuffs, the only tools the law permitted him to carry. He relied entirely on his physical presence, his deep understanding of his community, and the deeply ingrained cultural respect for law enforcement to maintain the peace. He had navigated countless volatile situations in exactly this manner, successfully de-escalating tensions without ever needing to resort to lethal force. There was no reason for him to believe that this particular July morning would deviate from the established norms of his entire career. He was a guardian watching over his people, completely unaware that one of those people had already made a silent, irrevocable decision to shatter the foundational piece of the territory. Hidden within the dispersing crowd was Siamo Jr., a man whose mind had become entirely consumed by the perceived injustice of the court's decision. As a member of the family that felt deeply wronged by the acquittal, the verdict had ignited a catastrophic fire within him, burning away all rational thought and societal restraint. He did not see the courthouse as a place of law. He saw it as the site of a profound betrayal. Moving through the throng of emotional attendees, his actions were driven by a singular, blinding focus on retribution. Concealed beneath his clothing, pressed cold against his body, was a handgun. The mere presence of this weapon within the confines of the court building was a severe violation of the law, a premeditated act that signaled his intention to subvert the peaceful resolution of the dispute. The tropical heat of the morning outside was a stark contrast to the chilling, calculated nature of his intent. He navigated the crowded space not with the chaotic stumbling of a man overwhelmed by grief, but with the terrifying, deliberate trajectory of a predator closing in on its prey. He was not looking for a fight. He was executing a sudden, unilateral escalation to lethal violence. The intersection of these two men, the dedicated, unarmed protector and the armed, vengeance-driven relative, occurred with a suddenness that defied comprehension. There was no preceding argument, no escalating shouting match to serve as a warning. There was no opportunity for Lieutenant Brown to deploy his decades of de-escalation experience, no chance to reach for his baton, no moment to even process the lethal nature of the threat before him. As Siamo Jr. approached the lobby area where Lieutenant Brown was maintaining his vigil, the unwritten social contract of American Samoa was violently torn apart. Without a single word of warning, without any declaration of intent, the assailant breached the perimeter of acceptable human behavior. He drew the concealed handgun, raising it with lethal purpose, and aimed directly at the chest of the defenseless officer standing before him. The explosion of gunfire within the confined space of the GHC Reed building lobby was an auditory assault that instantly paralyzed the surrounding crowd. The sharp, deafening cracks of the handgun discharging at close range echoed off the walls, a horrific intrusion of mainland violence into the sanctuary of the island. Siamo Jr. fired multiple times in rapid succession, the muzzle flashes illuminating the dim space with terrifying brevity. The bullets struck Lieutenant Brown with devastating force. The 19-year veteran of the police force, a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to the safety and well-being of his community, had absolutely no defense against the onslaught. The physical impact of the projectiles was immediate and catastrophic. Lieutenant Brown collapsed under the barrage, his body succumbing to the severe, fatal trauma inflicted upon him. He fell to the floor of the lobby, the life draining from him in a matter of seconds. There was no lingering struggle, no opportunity for medical intervention. The injuries he sustained were absolute and final. The man who had stood as a pillar of calm just moments before was now gone, leaving behind a void that would forever alter the history of the department he served. The immediate aftermath of the fatal shots was a scene of unparalleled chaos and profound shock. The dense crowd in the lobby, initially frozen by the sudden eruption of gunfire, fractured into absolute panic. The air, previously thick with emotional tension, was now choked with the acrid smell of burnt gunpowder and the terrifying realization of what had just transpired. Screams echoed through the corridors as bystanders scrambled for cover, desperate to escape the line of fire. Yet, in the midst of this overwhelming terror, the true measure of courage within the Department of Public Safety was starkly illuminated. The two other police officers who had been assigned to the security detail alongside Lieutenant Brown witnessed the brutal assassination of their colleague. Like Brown, they were completely unarmed, entirely bereft of any ballistic protection or firearms to match the lethal threat before them. Logic and the fundamental human instinct for self-preservation would dictate that they take cover, that they retreat from a man actively discharging a firearm. But duty, and an overwhelming sense of loyalty to their fallen brother in arms, compelled them to do the exact opposite. Without a moment of hesitation, without any regard for their own immense vulnerability, the two unarmed officers charged directly toward the active shooter. It was an act of supreme, almost incomprehensible bravery. They threw themselves into the path of danger, attempting to bridge the distance and physically subdue the armed assailant with nothing but their bare hands. They were fighting to prevent further loss of life, to neutralize the threat that had just stolen their lieutenant. But bravery alone cannot stop a bullet. As the two officers closed the gap, Siamo Jr., still gripped by his murderous frenzy, pivoted and turned his weapon upon them. The firearm discharged again, the deafening cracks tearing through the lobby once more. Both of the charging officers were struck by the incoming fire. The bullets tore through their flesh, inflicting severe and agonizing injuries that halted their desperate advance. They fell to the floor, bleeding heavily, their bodies bearing the terrible cost of their selfless attempt to protect the public and avenge their colleague. The lobby had transformed into a scene of absolute carnage, with 3 officers down and an active, heavily armed assailant still standing amidst the panic. It was in this critical, desperate moment, with the police line utterly decimated and the threat of further mass casualties looming large, that the collective spirit of the people of American Samoa asserted itself. The sight of the 3 downed officers, the sheer brutality of the unprovoked attack, catalyzed a profound reaction among the surviving police personnel and the brave civilians trapped in the vicinity. The paralysis of shock gave way to a desperate, furious resolve. Recognizing that the shooter had to be stopped at any cost, and seeing that the initial wave of officers had sacrificed themselves in the attempt, a wave of humanity surged forward. Uninjured police officers, acting in concert with incredibly courageous bystanders, converged on Siamo Jr. from multiple directions. They descended upon him with overwhelming physical force, a chaotic but determined swarm of bodies tackling the assailant to the hard floor of the lobby. The struggle was frantic and desperate, a life-or-death wrestling match to secure the firearm and end the violence. Hands grasped at the weapon, pulling, prying, and twisting to wrest the gun from his grip before he could pull the trigger again. The sheer weight of the crowd, fueled by adrenaline and the absolute necessity of survival, finally overwhelmed the shooter. They pinned him down, successfully disarming him and eliminating the immediate threat to the public. The handgun was secured, its terrifying reign of violence abruptly halted by the collective action of the community. As the dust slowly began to settle in the lobby of the temporary High Court, the full, devastating reality of the incident became horrifyingly clear. The air was heavy with the sounds of moaning from the injured officers and the continued weeping of the terrified bystanders. Medical personnel would soon rush into the scene, fighting desperately to stabilize the two wounded officers whose brave charge had cost them so dearly. But for Detective Lieutenant Lisla Brown, no medical intervention could reverse the tragedy. He lay still upon the floor, a silent testament to the catastrophic failure of a system that had asked him to face the darkest aspects of human nature without the means to defend his own life. The blood pooling beneath him marked not just the end of a remarkable 19-year career, but the definitive, brutal end of an era for the entire territory. The cherished belief that American Samoa was immune to the lethal violence of the outside world had been irrevocably shattered by the very people it sought to protect. The island had lost a dedicated guardian, a respected leader, all because the laws designed to maintain a peaceful society had left him completely defenseless against a man who had chosen to abandon peace entirely. The unwritten contract was broken, and the echoes of those gunshots would resonate through the halls of justice, forcing a painful, deeply controversial reckoning with the true cost of their peaceful traditions. The physical layout of the temporary High Court facility, located on the lower level of the GHC Reed building in Malaloa, played a crucial, albeit silent, role in the catastrophe that unfolded on the morning of July 22, 2010. Unlike purpose-built judicial complexes on the mainland, which are designed with extensive security perimeters, metal detectors, and heavily fortified holding areas, this temporary courthouse was an adapted commercial space. The architectural constraints meant that the distance between the highly charged atmosphere of the courtroom and the public lobby was minimal. There were no secondary buffer zones to allow heated emotions to cool, no separate exits to safely usher away acquitted defendants from disgruntled families. The transition from the sterile, formal environment of legal arbitration to the unpredictable, open space of the civilian world was immediate and abrupt. It was within this narrow, transitional space that the tragic intersection of a flawed legal policy and an uncontrollable human rage occurred. The Department of Public Safety had dispatched officers to this specific location precisely because they understood the volatile geometry of the building and the deeply personal nature of the trial concluding inside. The charges of assault and weapons possession had already fractured the community, turning the trial into a focal point for intense familial loyalty and bitter resentment. Inside the courtroom, the culmination of the judicial process arrived with the jury returning their decision. The formal declaration of acquittal, clearing the defendant of all charges, acted as an immediate and devastating catalyst. In the rigid framework of the law, a not guilty verdict is a definitive conclusion, a mandate to release the accused and close the case. However, in the emotional reality of the victim's family, this verdict was perceived as an agonizing miscarriage of justice, an unacceptable invalidation of their trauma. The structured decorum of the courtroom dissolved the moment the decision was finalized. The heavy wooden doors, acting as the only barrier between the organized procedures of the court and the uncontained fury of the attendees, swung open. The crowd that spilled out into the lobby was not merely disappointed. They were a collective mass of searing, unadulterated anger. The air in the confined hallway instantly thickened, charged with the dangerous, unpredictable energy of people who felt utterly betrayed by the very system designed to protect them. The low murmurs of shock rapidly escalated into a chaotic cacophony of distress, creating a highly unstable environment that required immediate and authoritative crowd control. Standing at the epicenter of this emerging chaos was Detective Lieutenant Lisla Brown, a 19-year veteran whose career was defined by his steady hand and calm demeanor. Tasked with securing the perimeter and maintaining order, he positioned himself in the lobby to manage the exiting crowd. He relied entirely on his extensive experience, his deep cultural understanding of the local community, and the visual authority of his uniform. In accordance with the strict, long-standing regulations of American Samoa, he was entirely unarmed when it came to lethal defense. His duty belt held only a wooden baton and a pair of steel handcuffs. There was no ballistic vest shielding his chest, no firearm resting at his hip. He was a product of a policing philosophy that fundamentally believed the cultural bonds of the island were strong enough to deter lethal violence against law enforcement. As he watched the agitated crowd pour outward, he prepared to employ verbal de-escalation techniques, a strategy that had successfully navigated him through countless similar situations over his 2 decades of service. He maintained a composed posture, projecting an aura of stability, completely unaware that the situation escalating before him was entirely immune to reason, authority, or cultural respect. Among the grieving and furious individuals exiting the courtroom was Siamo Jr., a man whose psychological state had completely fractured under the weight of the acquittal. He was intimately connected to the family of the original victim, and the court's failure to convict the defendant had triggered a catastrophic internal shift. He no longer viewed the legal system as a legitimate arbiter of justice. Instead, he saw it as an entity that had actively failed him and his kin. This profound sense of betrayal eradicated all remaining social restraints, replacing them with a singular, blinding compulsion for immediate retribution. His movements through the dense crowd in the lobby were not erratic or confused. They were chillingly purposeful. Concealed beneath his clothing was a loaded handgun, an illegal and lethal anomaly in an environment strictly governed by unarmed enforcement. The presence of this weapon transformed his anger from a localized public disturbance into an imminent mass casualty threat. He navigated the chaotic space with a terrifying focus, his eyes locking onto the primary symbol of the system he felt had wronged his family. He did not seek out the acquitted defendant. He sought out the nearest representative of the authority that had allowed the acquittal to happen. The confrontation materialized with a suddenness that offered absolutely no opportunity for defensive reaction. There was no preliminary altercation, no verbal exchange to signal an escalation in hostilities. The typical warning signs of an impending physical assault were entirely absent. As Siamo Jr. closed the distance between himself and Lieutenant Brown, he bypassed every conventional threshold of conflict. Without a single word of warning, he breached the personal space of the seasoned detective and smoothly drew the concealed handgun from his clothing. The realization of the lethal threat was simultaneous with its execution. Lieutenant Brown, armed only with a baton that remained securely fastened to his belt, had mere fractions of a second to process the presence of the firearm leveled directly at him. His 19 years of law enforcement training, heavily focused on community policing and unarmed compliance, provided no protocol for surviving a point-blank ambush by a determined shooter. He was rendered entirely defenseless, trapped in a fatal bottleneck of architectural design and legislative policy. The enclosed space of the GHC Reed building lobby amplified the catastrophic violence that followed. Siamo Jr. raised the weapon and opened fire at incredibly close range. The discharging firearm produced a deafening, percussive shockwave that physically assaulted the eardrums of everyone in the immediate vicinity. The muzzle flashes were blindingly bright against the dim lighting of the hallway, a horrific strobe effect illuminating the brutal execution of a public servant. Multiple projectiles struck Lieutenant Brown with devastating kinetic force. The physiological impact was immediate and catastrophic. The bullets tore through vital organs, causing massive internal trauma that instantly incapacitated the veteran officer. The sheer force of the impact drove him backward, his body collapsing onto the hard floor of the temporary courthouse. The injuries he sustained were absolute and overwhelmingly fatal. The gentle, dedicated detective, a man deeply respected for his peaceful approach to law enforcement, was violently stripped of his life in a matter of seconds. He fell in the line of duty, a tragic victim of a system that had required him to stand on the front lines of human conflict while intentionally denying him the tools necessary to protect his own life. The immediate aftermath of the initial volley of gunfire was a scene of unparalleled terror and disorienting chaos. The lobby, previously filled with the sounds of angry grievances, was instantly plunged into a frantic, scrambling panic. Civilians dove for cover behind structural pillars and overturned furniture, their screams mingling with the sharp, acrid smell of burnt gunpowder that rapidly filled the confined air. The sudden introduction of lethal violence into the administrative heart of the territory induced a collective state of severe shock. Yet, Amidst this overwhelming sensory overload and instinctual drive for self-preservation, a remarkable display of raw, unfiltered courage emerged from the remaining law enforcement personnel. 2 additional police officers, who had been assigned to the same security detail as Lieutenant Brown, witnessed the brutal assassination of their superior officer. Like their fallen colleague, these officers were strictly bound by the territorial mandate and were completely unarmed. They possessed no firearms to return fire, no tactical shields to advance behind, and no protective armor to absorb incoming rounds. Despite their extreme vulnerability and the active, lethal threat standing merely yards away, the 2 officers did not retreat or seek cover. Driven by a profound sense of duty and a desperate, instinctive need to stop the shooter from claiming more lives, they initiated a direct, physical charge towards Siamo Jr. It was an act of extraordinary bravery, an attempt to bridge the perilous gap and utilize their own bodies to physically subdue a man armed with a loaded weapon. They sprinted through the dissipating smoke, their hands outstretched, attempting a desperate tackle to neutralize the threat. However, their courageous momentum was abruptly and violently halted. Siamo Jr., still operating in a state of hyper-vigilant, murderous aggression, registered the incoming threat. He pivoted swiftly, tracking the charging officers, and once again engaged the trigger. The firearm discharged repeatedly, the deafening cracks echoing over the screams of the terrified bystanders. The incoming projectiles found their targets with brutal efficiency. Both of the advancing officers were struck by the gunfire, the bullets tearing through their unprotected bodies and inflicting severe, agonizing injuries. The physical shock and immense pain instantly collapsed their advance, sending them crashing to the blood-stained floor alongside their deceased lieutenant. In less than 60 seconds, the entire security detail assigned to the High Court had been systematically dismantled by a single armed individual. The lobby had been transformed from a center of civic administration into a horrific scene of mass violence, with 3 public servants lying heavily wounded or dead on the ground. The assailant remained standing, the smoking weapon still clutched in his hand, a terrifying embodiment of unchecked vengeance dominating a space meant for justice. It was precisely at this critical juncture, with the primary line of defense completely neutralized and the imminent threat of further civilian casualties looming, that the fundamental character of the community asserted itself. The sight of 3 unarmed officers sacrificing themselves, the sheer brutality of the unprovoked slaughter, acted as a powerful catalyst for the surrounding civilians and the surviving, uninjured police personnel in the periphery. The paralyzing grip of initial shock rapidly morphed into a collective, furious determination to end the violence. Recognizing that the shooter had to be physically overwhelmed before he could reload or reacquire targets, a spontaneous and desperate mobilization occurred. A diverse group of individuals, comprised of both off-duty officers and incredibly courageous citizens, surged towards Siamo Jr. from multiple angles. They did not hesitate, throwing themselves into a frantic, life-or-death physical struggle. They swarmed the assailant, their combined momentum tackling him violently to the ground. The ensuing struggle was chaotic and brutal, a desperate wrestling match to gain control of the firearm. Multiple pairs of hands grasped at Siamo Jr.'s arms, prying his fingers away from the grip of the weapon, pinning his limbs to the hard floor through the sheer application of overwhelming weight and numbers. The collective effort, fueled by massive surges of adrenaline and the absolute necessity of neutralizing the active threat, finally succeeded. The handgun was forcibly wrenched from his possession, slid across the floor out of reach, and the assailant was heavily restrained beneath the mass of brave individuals. The immediate threat of active gunfire was finally extinguished, replaced by the heavy, labored breathing of the restraining crowd and the devastating, agonizing realization of the carnage that lay around them. The temporary High Court was secure, but the cost was an unimaginable tragedy that would permanently scar the history and the legal landscape of American Samoa. The aftermath of the bloodshed in the lobby of the temporary High Court, housed within the GHC Reed building, transformed the space into a forensic theater of profound grief and clinical analysis. For the American Samoa Department of Public Safety, The immediate hours following the assassination of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown were a blur of high-stakes logistics and raw, unvarnished emotional trauma. The territory, having long prided itself on a culture of peaceful resolution, found itself suddenly thrust into the harsh spotlight of a major violent crime investigation. Investigators arrived at a scene that defied everything they understood about their community. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of ozone and copper, the lingering remnants of the gunfire that had shattered the silence of the tropical morning. Every inch of the lobby was documented with agonizing precision. Investigators meticulously mapped the trajectories of the bullets, identified the scattered shell casings, and secured the area as a crime scene of unparalleled severity. The process was not merely about collecting physical evidence. It was an effort to reconstruct the final, tragic seconds of a 19-year veteran whose life had been extinguished by a lethal, premeditated ambush. The investigation into Siamo Jr. quickly revealed a chilling level of preparation that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding culture of trust. The shooter had arrived at the courthouse not as a random participant in a tense trial, but as an individual with a specific, murderous objective. Forensic evidence and witness testimonies began to paint a picture of a man who had meticulously concealed a firearm beneath his clothing, bypasses the lax security protocols that were a symptom of the territory's peaceful traditions, and targeted the nearest authority figure once his desired verdict failed to materialize. The fact that the firearm had been smuggled into the court building was a devastating indictment of the existing safety measures. It highlighted the dangerous complacency that had allowed a culture of verbal deference to law enforcement to be replaced, in the mind of the assailant, by an absolute contempt for the rule of law. As investigators peeled back the layers of the suspect's background, they uncovered a history of volatility and familial grievance that had festered until it erupted into the carnage seen that morning. The evidentiary process was grueling, conducted in an atmosphere of collective mourning and simmering public indignation. The Department of Public Safety, still reeling from the loss of their colleague and the severe injuries sustained by the two other officers who had charged the shooter, worked under the heavy burden of duty. They had to maintain their professional detachment while acknowledging the personal loss that permeated their department. Every witness statement taken from the bystanders, many of whom were still shivering from the shock of the event, echoed the same horrific reality. A calm, unarmed officer had been gunned down without any provocation or warning. The detectives compiling the case against Siamo Jr. found their path remarkably clear in terms of factual evidence, as the assault had occurred in a crowded, high-visibility environment. Yet, the legal complexities of the case were only just beginning to surface, as the defense began to probe the systemic failures of the courthouse security and the mental state of the perpetrator. The investigation extended beyond the physical evidence, reaching into the social and cultural fabric of the territory. The police leadership, cognizant of the catastrophic loss, initiated an internal review to address the glaring vulnerability of their officers. This investigation into their own protocols was a painful but necessary undertaking. They had to confront the reality that their unarmed policing philosophy, while honorable in its intent, had proven fatal in the face of modern criminal violence. The detectives, in their interviews with family members and acquaintances of both the victim and the shooter, sought to understand the tipping point, the specific moment when a local dispute transitioned into a death sentence for a public servant. This work required a delicate balance of cultural sensitivity and unwavering rigor as they navigated a small, tight-knit community where everyone was connected in some capacity to the families involved. The investigation was not just about the crime itself, but about the profound societal failure that had permitted such a tragedy to unfold in the heart of Fagatogo. As the weeks and months rolled into years, the investigative file grew into a massive collection of documents, medical reports, and forensic analyses. The reports from the medical examiners, detailing the exact nature of the trauma inflicted upon the fallen lieutenant and his wounded colleagues, became sobering reminders of the brutality of the act. These documents were more than just legal requirements. They were symbols of the high price paid by those tasked with upholding order in a society that had yet to reconcile its tradition of peace with the rising tide of lethal, modern crime. The investigative team remained steadfast in their commitment to build a case that would withstand the most intense judicial scrutiny. They were acutely aware that they were not just building a case for a prosecutor. They were building a record that would define the legacy of Lucilla Brown and serve as a catalyst for the necessary legislative reforms that were already beginning to take shape. The burden of the investigation was compounded by the intense public attention. The media coverage, both local and regional, ensured that the details of the assassination were kept at the forefront of public discourse. For the investigators, this meant working under a constant lens of scrutiny, with the community demanding answers and, above all, justice. They had to ensure that every aspect of the chain of custody for evidence was pristine and that no procedural error could be exploited by the defense to undermine the trial. The investigative staff, who had been co-workers and friends of the deceased lieutenant, performed their tasks with a stoic dedication. They treated the suspect with the procedural fairness required by law, even while the knowledge of what he had done burned in their minds. This adherence to professional ethics was the ultimate testament to the legacy of Lucilla Brown, a man who had believed in the system until his final breath. The culmination of the investigative process provided the foundation for the eventual plea deal, but the road there was paved with procedural obstacles. The defense team, utilizing every legal maneuver available, challenged the circumstances surrounding the shooter's apprehension and the evidence obtained at the scene. They sought to introduce arguments regarding the suspect's psychological stability and the role of the courtroom environment in exacerbating his mental health conditions. The investigators had to respond to these challenges, meticulously refuting attempts to frame the assassination as anything other than a cold-blooded, calculated act of violence. Their efforts ensured that the case remained anchored in the objective reality of the evidence collected on the lobby floor. The forensic reconstruction of the event, which utilized detailed witness accounts and ballistic analysis, proved to be an insurmountable hurdle for the defense, ultimately forcing the suspect into a corner where his only remaining option was to accept responsibility. By the time the investigation was effectively concluded and the case was ready for its final stages, the territory of American Samoa had been permanently altered. The investigative phase had provided the clarity needed to confront the uncomfortable truths of their public safety model. It had exposed the inadequacy of their security measures, the dangerous lack of lethal defense tools for their police force, and the reality that traditional peacemaking was not a substitute for robust law enforcement. The detectives, having worked to resolve the case of the century, found themselves looking toward a future where the badge would carry more weight and the officer more protection. They had done their part, closing the case against the man who had shattered their world, but the process had left the entire force scarred. The exhaustive, years-long investigation had been the mirror reflecting the true cost of their innocence, and in completing it, they had ensured that the memory of Lucilla Brown was shielded by the finality of the law. They had turned the pain of their loss into the hard, cold steel of legal evidence, constructing a monument of justice that would stand long after the physical wounds of the survivors had healed. The case was closed, the file was sealed, and the community was left with the heavy, quiet understanding that they could never go back to the world as it existed before that July morning. The investigations had succeeded, not by returning the life that was taken, but by ensuring that the society they protected would finally have the eyes to see the danger they had long ignored, and the strength to arm their guardians against it. The final chapters of the investigation were written not in ink, but in the institutional changes that would ensure no other officer would ever again stand defenseless against the kind of malice that had taken Lucilla Brown. It was the long, slow, and necessary work of a department honoring its dead by securing the living, ensuring that the void he left was filled with the resolve to never again be caught unprepared by the sudden, violent interruptions of human rage. The resolution of the legal proceedings against Siamo Jr. stands as the most protracted and emotionally harrowing chapter in the history of American Samoa's judicial system. Following the years of intensive investigation, the court case became a focal point for a territory struggling to reconcile its traditional values with the harsh realities of modern criminal violence. The trial, or more accurately the long, arduous process leading toward a final adjudication, was a saga of immense procedural complexity. It was marked by multiple changes in the suspect's legal representation, each iteration of the defense team bringing forth new challenges that served to delay the path toward resolution. These delays were a source of profound agony for the family of the fallen officer, Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. For the survivors, the legal system felt increasingly detached from the visceral reality of their loss, turning a clear-cut act of murder into a chessboard of motions, briefs, and hearings that seemed to stretch into an indefinite horizon. The emotional toll was compounded by the profound loss of Ailey Liliatumua Sonoma Brown, the lieutenant's widow, in March of 2016. Her passing, occurring just weeks before the proceedings were set to reach their critical conclusion, stripped the family of their primary beacon of grief and perseverance, leaving the remaining relatives to navigate the final stages of the trial in a state of compounded sorrow. Her absence during the final moments of justice served as a haunting reminder of the collateral damage wrought by the initial act of violence, as the judicial process had outlived the very person who stood to gain the most closure from its outcome. Before the final gavel could sound in the courtroom, a poignant moment of cultural reconciliation took place, a traditional practice that highlighted the deep contrast between the island's heritage and the brutality of the crime. The family of the perpetrator, acknowledging the insurmountable weight of the horror inflicted by Siamo Jr., performed the ritual of ifoga. This ancient ceremony of repentance requires the family of the offender to humble themselves completely, presenting themselves in a state of absolute supplication before the family of the victim, often under the cover of a woven mat to symbolize their shame and their plea for mercy. In this instance, the ritual served as a powerful, somber acknowledgement of the communal fracture that the murder had caused. The daughter and the brother of the late Lieutenant Brown, demonstrating a level of dignity and grace that resonated deeply within the island community, officially accepted the gesture of the ifoga. They expressed their forgiveness for the perpetrator on a human and spiritual level, an act of tremendous fortitude. However, they were equally resolute in their stance that such cultural reconciliation was distinct from the requirements of the secular law. They made it clear that while they could offer forgiveness as individuals, the machinery of justice had to continue its work, holding the defendant strictly accountable for his crimes. This distinction between personal forgiveness and legal retribution provided a necessary closure for the community, allowing the tension to dissipate even as the trial entered its final, formal phase. The conclusion of the legal drama arrived in March of 2016 when the defense, facing the overwhelming evidence compiled during the 6-year investigative process, opted to enter into a plea agreement with the prosecution. This resolution was a strategic choice designed to bypass the uncertainties of a jury trial, which carried the risk of further, indefinite delays. On April 25, 2016, the courtroom was packed with members of the public, fellow law enforcement officers, and representatives from the various facets of the territorial government, all gathered to witness the final accounting for the tragedy. Presiding over the court was Judge Lyle Richmond, who was tasked with the heavy responsibility of determining the appropriate penalty for the senseless assassination of a public servant. The courtroom atmosphere was defined by a profound and heavy solemnity. The silence was absolute, reflecting the collective weight of a community that had lived with this trauma for nearly a decade. When the judge delivered the sentence, it was a moment of definitive finality. Siamo Jr. was sentenced to life in prison for the second-degree murder of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. Furthermore, the judge imposed 2 consecutive sentences of 10 years each for the 2 counts of first-degree assault, pertaining to the officers who had been wounded while courageously attempting to stop the shooter in the lobby of the GHC Reed building. The total duration of the sentencing was a reflection of the court's determination to punish the crime with the highest possible level of severity allowed under the agreement. The remarks made by Judge Richmond during the sentencing phase were stark and uncompromising. He spoke to the profound impact of the crime, noting that it had transcended the physical murder of one man. It had been an assault on the very concept of the rule of law. He articulated that the brazen nature of the attack, occurring in a space specifically meant for the administration of justice, represented a direct defiance of the societal order. For the survivors and the witnesses, the judge's words were a necessary validation. The sentences represented not just a punitive measure, but an acknowledgement of the profound loss experienced by the department and the territory. For the surviving officers who had been wounded in the line of duty, the outcome of the sentencing was a validation of their own actions. They had stood their ground against an active shooter with no weapons of their own, driven by a commitment that had nearly cost them their lives. The knowledge that the man responsible for their trauma and for the loss of their mentor would spend the remainder of his days behind bars provided a tangible measure of justice, however incomplete it might feel compared to the permanence of the death they had witnessed. The legal chapter of the Lucilla Brown case was officially closed, creating a permanent record that stood as a warning to anyone who might consider taking the law into their own hands in the future. As the prisoner was led away from the courtroom, the finality of the sentence seemed to settle over the assembled crowd like a shroud. The years of legal maneuvering, the shifts in counsel, the debates over procedural rights, and the exhausting testimony had finally culminated in a result that the law deemed sufficient. Yet, even as the gavel fell, the atmosphere in the courtroom was not one of celebration, but of profound, lingering reflection. The life sentence provided no comfort for the empty chair at the Brown family dinner table, nor did it reverse the injuries sustained by the two officers who had to live with the physical and psychological reminders of that July day. It was, however, the absolute limit of what the system could provide. The judicial process, in all its perceived flaws and frustrating delays, had successfully navigated the wreckage of the tragedy to arrive at a verdict that recognized the dignity of the victim. The sentence was the final word in a narrative that had begun with the shattering of a peaceful society, and it was a word that emphasized accountability, the necessity of the rule of law, and the absolute unacceptability of violence against those who protect the community. The trial concluded, but its resonance remained. It became a point of reference for all subsequent discussions of security in the territory, a benchmark by which the success or failure of any new policy would be measured. In the final estimation, the resolution of the court case was the essential step that allowed the territory of American Samoa to transition from a period of traumatic instability into a new, more guarded reality. It was a victory for the legal system, one that served to restore the damaged trust of the public in their institutions. The sentencing brought to a close the most intense period of public and legal scrutiny the territory had ever known, and it did so by ensuring that the person who had brought the violence to their doors would never again be in a position to threaten the peace that the community so desperately valued. The legacy of Lieutenant Brown was finally protected by the full weight of the law, ensuring that his name would forever be associated with justice rather than just the tragedy of his end. The courtroom emptied, the lights were dimmed, and for the first time in 6 years, the shadow of the case began to recede, leaving the territory to grapple with the long-term consequences of what had happened, now with the assurance that the perpetrator would be permanently sequestered from the society he had so brutally betrayed. It was a closure, achieved through the persistence of the investigators, the endurance of the survivors, and the final, sober application of the law, marking the end of an era and the beginning of a future where justice would be pursued with eyes wide open to the dangers of the world. The profound tragedy that claimed the life of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown did not merely end on the floor of the GHC Reed building lobby. It initiated a painful, necessary, and irreversible transformation of the entire territorial identity. In the wake of the assassination, the initial shock that paralyzed the islanders quickly crystallized into a fierce, collective introspection. The cherished, decades-old illusion of American Samoa as an isolated paradise, exempt from the lethal violence that defined the mainland United States, was shattered beyond repair. This loss of innocence was the most significant, albeit traumatic, consequence of the incident. The territory was forced to acknowledge that its geographic location provided no shield against the darker impulses of humanity, and that its traditional, unarmed model of policing, while deeply rooted in local culture and values, had been rendered obsolete by the realities of modern criminality. The murder of a man as universally respected as Lieutenant Brown, a man who personified the very best of his community, served as an unignorable clarion call for change. It was a catalyst that stripped away the complacency of the administration, demanding an immediate and comprehensive overhaul of the laws and protocols governing the Department of Public Safety. The most tangible and immediate impact of the tragedy was the wholesale abandonment of the prohibition against arming police officers. Prior to the event, the sight of a patrol officer carrying a firearm was virtually unheard of, a policy framed as an expression of the territory's peaceful spirit. Following the assassination, that policy was abruptly exposed as a dangerous and untenable liability. The government, under immense pressure from the police force and a terrified public, moved with unprecedented speed to reform the arming regulations. Officers were henceforth authorized to carry firearms in the line of duty, a decision that transformed the visual and functional reality of law enforcement on the island overnight. This change was not just a bureaucratic shift. It was a fundamental alteration of the relationship between the police and the citizens they were sworn to protect. The badge, once a symbol of community trust mediated through verbal authority, now carried the heavy, pragmatic weight of potential lethal defense. While the transition was handled with careful attention to training and cultural sensitivity, the underlying shift was absolute. The territory had decided that the lives of its guardians were worth more than the preservation of a peaceful image that had proven to be lethally vulnerable. Beyond the legislative reforms, the incident left a permanent scar on the social fabric of the territory, serving as a somber reference point for all subsequent discussions on safety and justice. The bravery displayed by the two unarmed officers who charged the shooter in the lobby became a cornerstone of the department's modern identity. Their actions, which saved countless lives at the cost of their own severe injuries, were codified into the training manuals and oral histories of the police force. They became the embodiment of the new standard of courage, replacing the old, passive approach to threat management with an active, tactical response that prioritized survival and neutralization. The event also sparked a necessary, albeit painful, dialogue within the community about the nature of family honor and the dangers of allowing personal grievances to escalate into public violence. The tragedy forced families to confront the reality that private vendettas, when fueled by unchecked emotion and illegal weapons, have devastating, public consequences that cannot be mitigated by traditional rituals alone. The ifoga ceremony, while valuable for communal healing, was no longer viewed as a sufficient substitute for the impartial application of the law. This evolution in the public consciousness represented a maturation of the territory's judicial identity, acknowledging that the rule of law must be absolute and that the sanctity of public institutions is a prerequisite for any meaningful peace. The legacy of Lucilla Brown himself shifted from that of a dedicated local officer to a martyr for institutional reform. His 19-year career, characterized by his mild-mannered and effective de-escalation, was framed by the tragedy as an example of what could be achieved through character, while his death was framed as the reason why character alone is no longer enough. The police department took deliberate steps to ensure that his sacrifice was memorialized, not just through ceremonies, but through the continuous, improved safety standards of every officer patrolling the streets. The training curricula were updated to include comprehensive scenarios based on the lessons learned from the GHC Reed lobby, ensuring that the tactical failures of that morning were never repeated. Every recruit entering the academy was taught the story of Lieutenant Brown, not as a history lesson, but as a survival lesson. They learned that the world had changed, that the peace of the island was a fragile thing requiring vigilant protection, and that the tools of their trade were a necessary response to the threats they might face. This institutional memory became the bedrock of a new professionalism, a modern era of policing that blended the island's traditional values of service with a hard-won, pragmatic understanding of security. Furthermore, the trauma experienced by the surviving witnesses and the families of the victims underwent a long, agonizing process of integration. The memory of the gunshots, the screams, and the chaos did not vanish. Rather, they were incorporated into the collective memory of the territory. The GHC Reed building, once just an administrative facility, remained for many an evocative monument to the day the island's peaceful isolation ended. The government eventually moved toward more secure, dedicated court facilities, recognizing that the architectural vulnerabilities of the temporary courthouse had been a direct contributor to the ease with which the assailant carried out his plan. This physical restructuring of the judicial environment was a final, structural recognition that the safety of the public and the officers cannot be left to chance or the hope of a peaceful atmosphere. It was an admission that modern justice requires a physical environment that commands respect and provides security, a departure from the informal judicial settings of the past. The legacy of the assassination was thus woven into the very infrastructure of the territory, a constant, silent reminder of the price of innocence and the necessity of preparedness. In the broader context of American Pacific territories, the incident served as a cautionary tale that resonated across regional borders. It became a case study for law enforcement agencies throughout the Pacific, illustrating the critical necessity of assessing threat levels independently of local cultural expectations. The tragedy prompted other islands to reevaluate their own security policies, leading to a ripple effect of professionalization and reform that extended well beyond American Samoa. The lesson was clear. The duty of a society to protect its officers from lethal harm is a universal obligation that transcends the desire to maintain a peaceful, non-threatening image. Lieutenant Brown's death became a symbol that forced officials to take responsibility for the lives of those they placed in the path of conflict. The subsequent reform movement was not about abandoning culture. It was about ensuring that culture could continue to exist in a safe environment, protected by a police force that was finally given the means to fulfill its mission. Ultimately, the most lasting reflection of the case is the profound, lingering sense of a lost era. The people of American Samoa look back at the era of the unarmed officer with a complex mixture of nostalgia and relief. Nostalgia for a time when they truly believed that such violence was impossible, and relief that they were no longer living in that vulnerable state. They have emerged as a society that is more resilient, more aware of its dangers, and more committed to the protection of its civic servants. The memory of the detective who fell in the line of duty remains, but it is no longer accompanied by the despair of helplessness. Instead, his name is spoken with the respect due to a man whose life and death were the catalysts for a necessary modernization. He is remembered as the officer who taught the territory the final, hardest lesson about its place in the world. The calm, steady detective would likely have been the first to advocate for the safety of his fellow officers, and in the institutional changes that now define the police force, his values of service and dedication live on. The territory has moved forward, not by forgetting the pain of the past, but by building a more secure and rational future upon the foundations of that tragedy. The era of the unarmed guardian has closed, and the era of the professional, equipped, and vigilant officer has begun, ensuring that the peace the people so dearly prize is finally backed by the strength required to defend it. The echo of the gunshots has long since faded from the corridors of the GHC Reed building, but the silence they left behind is now filled with the sound of a community that has learned how to protect its own, honoring the life of a hero by ensuring that his successors walk into the future with the security he was denied. This is the ultimate, enduring resolution of the tragedy, a society that has faced its own vulnerability and chosen, in honor of the fallen, to arm itself with both justice and the strength to enforce it. The final chapter of this narrative is not defined by the conclusion of a court case or the implementation of new ballistic policies, but by the lingering, indelible mark the tragedy left on the human spirit of the island. To understand the full scope of what was lost, one must look beyond the institutional shifts and the legislative reforms. One must contemplate the silence that now occupies the space where a life once thrived. The assassination of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown did more than just break a law or end a career. It fundamentally altered the rhythm of community life, introducing a permanent note of caution into a culture that had previously thrived on uninhibited openness. For the people of American Samoa, the memory of that day is not a static historical entry, but a living, breathing shadow that informs their interactions, their expectations of authority, and their understanding of the world beyond their shores. The transition from a society of absolute trust to one of vigilant precaution was a psychological migration that was neither swift nor painless. It required the inhabitants to look at their neighbors, their institutions, and their own traditions with a new, sober clarity, acknowledging that the capacity for extreme violence is a universal human trait that does not respect cultural or geographic boundaries. This realization was the most profound and difficult lesson the territory ever had to learn, and it remains the primary, quiet foundation upon which their modern security architecture is built. In the years that have followed, the narrative of the assassination has been curated into a collective cautionary tale, passed down with a weight that transcends mere storytelling. It has become a moral framework used to teach the next generation about the dual nature of their heritage, the strength of their traditional bonds, and the necessity of structural protection. When parents speak to their children about the role of the police, they no longer speak solely of protectors who maintain order through moral authority. They speak of guardians who face real, tangible danger and who are now equipped to navigate it. The story of Lieutenant Brown has been woven into this social education, not to instill fear, but to instill a realistic understanding of civic duty and the gravity of public service. It has helped create a culture that is more appreciative of the sacrifices made by those who wear the badge, elevating the status of law enforcement from a routine, community-based role to a profession recognized for its genuine, high-stakes courage. This shift in public perception is perhaps the most enduring testament to the transformation that followed the tragedy, as it ensures that the humanity of the officer is no longer taken for granted. Moreover, the process of emotional integration for the survivors, the wounded officers, the witnesses, and the extended family has been an ongoing, private journey that sits alongside the public history of the event. For the two officers who were shot while charging the assailant, their recovery was never solely physical. It involved the arduous task of reconciling their survival with the death of their comrade. They remain the silent, living witnesses to the reality of that morning, embodying the shift from a passive, unarmed approach to an active, tactical methodology. Their presence in the community serves as a reminder of the human cost of the transition, a constant touchstone for the department that reminds them why training, equipment, and alertness are not just administrative requirements, but life-saving necessities. Their stories, often kept out of the public eye, have likely done more to shape the tactical culture of the Department of Public Safety than any official policy manual, as they carry the lived experience of the moment the old world died and the new one was forced into existence. The physical landscape of the territory, too, continues to serve as an inadvertent memorial. While the move to more secure court facilities was a pragmatic choice, the memory of the GHC Reed lobby remains etched in the collective psyche of the older generation. It is a place that many treat with a somber, silent reverence, recognizing it as the site where the island's innocence was effectively extinguished. This mental mapping of the territory, where certain locations are forever tied to the event, ensures that the tragedy is never truly lost to time. It is a part of the geography of their modern history, a landmark of a trauma that the community has, over time, managed to contain but never fully erase. The process of moving forward has meant accepting this dual reality, that the beauty and peace of the island are worth preserving, but that they can only be maintained through a realistic acknowledgement of the fragility of the peace they once took for granted. As time advances and the generation that witnessed the event gradually yields to the next, the challenge for American Samoa will be to maintain this hard-won vigilance without allowing it to harden into cynical mistrust. The equilibrium they have sought to achieve, the balance between their enduring, traditional culture and the requirements of a modern, secure state, is a delicate, living thing. It requires constant tending, a commitment to the rule of law that does not rely on outdated assumptions, and a continued honor for the individuals who stand on the front lines. The legacy of Lucilla Brown is thus not just a story of a murder. It is the story of a society's capacity to absorb an immense, unearned pain and use it to build a better, safer, and more resilient future. It is a story of resilience that is written in the daily actions of every officer who puts on their uniform, checks their equipment, and steps out into the world, aware of the dangers they face but dedicated to the service they perform. The broader implications of this case continue to ripple outward, influencing regional discussions on how small, isolated communities can best protect their institutional integrity in an increasingly interconnected and volatile world. The tragedy has taught the region that local cultural solutions, while powerful and vital for social cohesion, must be augmented by professional, robust security infrastructures. This synthesis of tradition and modernity is the hallmark of their evolution, a model of adaptation that could prove instructive for other regions facing similar challenges. The assassination, as terrible as it was, served as an unavoidable catalyst for this synthesis, forcing a reckoning that likely would have come under much worse circumstances had it been delayed further. By confronting the tragedy directly, the territory secured its future, ensuring that the peaceful nature of their islands would no longer be a soft target for the shadows of the outside world. In the final assessment, the story of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is a testament to the fact that peace is never an inherent quality of a place, but a deliberate, active project that must be defended. The sacrifice of a single life, when met with the resolve of an entire community, can become a cornerstone of enduring change. The territory of American Samoa has transformed its grief into a vigilant, rational, and honorable commitment to the safety of its people, ensuring that the legacy of their fallen hero is permanently secured within the structure of their laws and the character of their society. The silence in the lobby of the old courthouse is no longer just a void. It is a space for reflection, a place where the history of a great, necessary transformation began. It is here that the memory of the past meets the necessity of the present, serving as a reminder that the world is often a dangerous place, but that through courage, integrity, and the steadfast application of justice, a community can rise to meet any challenge. The transition is complete. The old ways have been honored, the new ways have been established, and the long, slow work of maintaining the peace continues, bolstered by the memory of the man who gave everything so that his people might finally and truly understand the value and the fragility of the safety they enjoy today. The narrative of this tragedy ends not in bitterness, but in a solemn, quiet acceptance of the responsibility that comes with being a society that refuses to let the light of its values be extinguished by the sudden darkness of a senseless act of violence. The memory of Lucilla Brown will continue to serve as the silent guide for every generation that follows, a beacon of service, and a mirror for their own collective responsibility, ensuring that his name and his sacrifice are never relegated to the fading pages of history, but remain a foundational part of the identity of the people he loved, protected, and ultimately helped lead into a more secure and enlightened future. The legacy of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown transcends the boundaries of the territory he served, evolving into an eternal paradigm of the inherent tension between cultural idealism and the unforgiving reality of modern justice. As the years stretch onward, the narrative of his sacrifice serves as a complex, multi-layered prism through which the society of American Samoa views its own evolution. This final perspective is not a conclusion, but an ongoing dialogue, a persistent meditation on what it means to protect a community that defines itself by its gentleness while living in an increasingly interconnected and volatile global landscape. The transition from the unarmed, trust-based policing of the past to the modern, tactically prepared force of the present represents a profound societal pivot, one that required the people to reconcile their deep-seated desire for an idyllic existence with the hard, cold imperatives of institutional safety. This synthesis of tradition and modern necessity is perhaps the most significant intellectual achievement of the territory in the post-tragedy era, demonstrating a capacity for collective resilience that is both rare and instructive. The story of Lucilla Brown has become the central touchstone for this intellectual shift, serving as a reminder that the price of progress is often paid in the currency of unimaginable personal loss. Every new officer who joins the ranks of the Department of Public Safety inherits not only the authority of their badge, but the weight of this specific history. They are trained within a framework that acknowledges the fatal vulnerability of their predecessors, ensuring that the tactical rigor they now possess is viewed not as a shift away from their island values, but as the modern manifestation of their commitment to the community. This conceptual framing is vital. It prevents the department from becoming a cold, alienated entity, keeping it rooted in the service-oriented philosophy that defined the career of the lieutenant. The balance between the iron resolve required for tactical security and the warmth of community-based engagement remains the defining challenge of the force, and it is in this delicate space that the spirit of Lucilla Brown continues to inform every decision, every protocol, and every patrol. The officers understand that they are the beneficiaries of a change bought with his blood, and this creates a unique internal culture of reverence and responsibility that acts as a powerful deterrent against professional apathy. The impact on the civilian population is equally profound, marked by a nuanced maturation in their expectations of public safety. There is a palpable shift in the public discourse, an underlying awareness that the maintenance of peace is a collaborative, ongoing effort that requires both the active participation of the community and the reliable, armed presence of the state. The period of naivety, where the mere absence of weapons was perceived as a hallmark of virtue, has been replaced by a more sophisticated understanding of civic duty. The community now recognizes that the protection of their guardians is, in effect, the protection of their own future. This realization has fostered a more supportive environment for the police, characterized by a mutual respect that is grounded in the reality of the dangers they face together. The tragedy has effectively closed the distance between the public and their security institutions, forging a bond that is based on the shared experience of loss and the shared commitment to ensuring that the tragedy remains an isolated anomaly in their history. Looking toward the horizon, the narrative of Lucilla Brown remains a foundational pillar for the territory's continued development. As American Samoa navigates the complexities of the mid-21st century, the lessons learned from the GHC Reed lobby serve as an anchor, preventing the society from drifting back into the perilous complacency of the past. The institutional memory of the event acts as a prophylactic against the repetition of history, ensuring that the vigilance of the police and the cooperation of the public are never left to wane. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the detective's legacy. His life, which was dedicated to the service of his people, continues to serve them even in his absence, providing the intellectual and structural framework for their safety. The story serves as a mirror for the community, reflecting both their deepest vulnerabilities and their greatest strengths, and in doing so, it encourages a continuous, rigorous self-assessment. The broader cultural impact of this transformation is equally significant, as it has influenced how the islands perceive their role within the Pacific region and the larger American political family. The tragedy forced the territory to assert its right to modern security standards, effectively lobbying for the resources and legislative adaptations necessary to survive in a modern context, without sacrificing its cultural identity. This assertion of institutional autonomy, born from the crucible of the assassination, has been a key factor in the strengthening of their judicial and public safety systems. The territory has emerged not as a passive recipient of external policies, but as an active, informed architect of its own safety, using the lessons learned from their darkest hour to craft a model of governance that is both culturally responsive and tactically sound. This evolution is a testament to the fact that even the most devastating events can be repurposed as a foundation for meaningful, structural advancement. As we contemplate the entirety of this history, it is impossible not to feel the lingering presence of the man who stood as the final barrier between a peaceful society and an act of absolute malice. The narrative of Lucilla Brown is a testament to the enduring power of a life lived with integrity and the weight of a death that demanded an entire system change its course. He was, in every sense, a man who represented the best of his time and whose untimely exit ushered in a new, necessary epoch of vigilance. His story is the story of American Samoa itself, a journey from innocence, through the fire of trauma, to the wisdom of experience. It is a story that speaks to the resilience of the human condition and the capacity of a community to rise from the ashes of its own broken heart to build a future that is safer, stronger, and more profoundly aware of the precious, fragile nature of the peace they have fought so hard to reclaim. The memory of the detective will never fade, not because of the tragedy of his end, but because of the triumph of the change he ignited. He remains the silent sentinel, the invisible guide, and the foundational hero of a society that finally understood that to love one's neighbor and to serve one's community requires the strength to face the darkness directly. The long, slow process of moving forward is complete, but the act of remembering is eternal. Every time a citizen walks past the new, secure halls of their modern courts, every time an officer steps out of their patrol vehicle, and every time the community gathers to celebrate its resilience, the presence of Lucilla Brown is felt. He is the quiet conscience of the territory, the standard by which all public duty is now measured, and the eternal reminder that true, lasting peace must be protected by those who possess both the wisdom to serve and the resolve to defend. The story ends here, not with a finality of death, but with a continuity of life, a life that was given for others and, in return, was given the immortality of a community's everlasting, vigilant gratitude. This is the truth of the man, the truth of the tragedy, and the truth of a society that has emerged from the shadow of its own vulnerability to stand, at long last, in the light of its own enduring, hard-won, and securely guarded resolve. The legacy of Lucilla Brown is not a tombstone, but a compass, guiding every subsequent generation toward a horizon of safety that he was denied, yet that he, more than anyone else, made possible for them to achieve and to cherish for all the years to come. The echoes of the tragedy in Fagatogo have long since ceased to be heard in the physical halls of the GHC Reed building, yet they continue to vibrate within the institutional DNA of American Samoa's law enforcement and the collective conscience of its people. To reflect on the entirety of this narrative is to understand that the passage of time does not dilute the magnitude of the loss, but rather refines its purpose. The life and death of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown have become an anchor point for a society that had to learn how to exist between two worlds, the traditional, harmonious past it desperately wished to preserve, and the complex, dangerous, and interconnected modern reality it could no longer evade. This final synthesis is a testament to the capacity of a human community to survive the dissolution of its fundamental myths and, in the process, build a reality that is far more durable and prepared for the uncertainties of the future. The transformation of the Department of Public Safety from an unarmed, trust-reliant body into a modern, tactically equipped police force was not an act of surrender to the outside world, but an act of profound self-preservation that ultimately honored the very values Brown spent his life upholding. In the contemporary landscape of the territory, the presence of an armed, vigilant police force is no longer viewed as a deviation from the island's peaceful character, but as the essential scaffolding that allows that peace to persist. This shift in perception is perhaps the most critical success in the aftermath of the assassination. It signifies that the public has evolved beyond the binary choice of either being peaceful or being protected, realizing instead that true safety is the prerequisite for the continued survival of their traditions. Every officer now moving through the streets, equipped and alert, carries with them the silent acknowledgement of what was once lacking. This is not a burden, but a professional standard that binds the force to the memory of the fallen. The training academies have moved beyond the abstract lessons of community policing to incorporate the visceral realities of high-intensity conflict resolution. This institutionalization of the hard lessons learned in 2010 ensures that the department does not rely on the hope of nonviolence, but on the certainty of its own capability to respond when that hope fails. For the survivors, those who walked through the fire of that day and emerged on the other side, the legacy is one of tempered resilience. The physical scars may have faded, and the trauma of the event has been integrated into the stories they tell, but the fundamental change in their understanding of the world remains constant. They are the keepers of the institutional memory, the human links between the era of innocence and the era of vigilance. Their continued presence within the ranks, or their influence as retired mentors, ensures that the department never loses sight of the human cost of negligence. They serve as a living reminder that while the system was overhauled, it is the people within it, the individuals who make the choice to stand their ground, who remain the ultimate defense against the darkness. This focus on the human element, even within a modernized and armed framework, is what keeps the department rooted in the spirit of the service that Lucilla Brown once performed with such distinction. The political and social discourse surrounding public safety has also reached a level of maturity that was previously impossible. The government and the citizenry engage in a more candid, robust debate about the allocation of resources, the necessity of judicial security, and the ongoing need for training. There is no longer a public appetite for the superficial displays of peace that once masked a dangerous vulnerability. Instead, there is a collective demand for substance, for secure facilities, for well-trained personnel, and for a judiciary that operates within a perimeter of absolute safety. This demand is not born out of a newfound love for authority, but out of a mature recognition that the protection of the community's institutions is the protection of the community's soul. The memory of the tragedy has become the standard against which all such policies are measured, ensuring that the government remains accountable to the safety of its citizens in a way that is informed by the gravity of their past failures. Furthermore, the influence of this case on the wider Pacific region continues to be significant, as other small, isolated societies look to American Samoa as a pioneer in the difficult work of institutional adaptation. The narrative provides a blueprint for how a community can confront a modern crisis without discarding its unique cultural identity. It demonstrates that the adoption of universal safety standards, such as the arming of police and the hardening of judicial infrastructure, does not signify the loss of a culture, but rather the act of providing that culture with the protective shell it needs to thrive in the modern age. By sharing their story, the people of American Samoa have contributed to a regional discourse on resilience that is invaluable for other territories facing similar pressures. They have shown that it is possible to modernize the mechanics of law enforcement while maintaining the spirit of communal service, and that this balance is the key to surviving the encroaching complexities of the 21st century. As we look at the legacy left behind by the man who gave everything, it is clear that his life has been reclaimed by his people as a symbol of their own endurance. His story is no longer owned by the tragedy of his death, but by the triumph of the community that refused to let his sacrifice be in vain. The name Lucilla Brown has been elevated to a position of historical importance, serving as a permanent landmark in the territory's journey toward maturity. His image, often invoked in tributes and training sessions alike, represents the bridge between the two eras of the island's history. He is remembered not as a relic of a failed past, but as a guiding light for a safer future, a man whose presence, though physically lost, remains a vital part of the force's moral and operational compass. The community's gratitude for his life and his service is expressed not just in memorials, but in the sustained commitment to the high standards of safety that were forged in the shadow of his murder. This narrative, which began with a peaceful, unarmed officer standing watch over a courthouse, concludes with a transformed society that has come to terms with the reality of its own fragility. The journey has been long and paved with an immense, unearned suffering, but the destination is a place of profound clarity. The people of American Samoa have demonstrated a capacity for change that is as impressive as it is necessary, proving that they are capable of navigating the darkest waters without losing their way. The echo of the gunshots has faded, but the vigilance they inspired is now a permanent feature of the island's character. This is the truth that endures. The safety of the territory is no longer a matter of luck or the hope for a peaceful community, but a matter of deliberate, professional, and uncompromising action. In this way, the death of one man has guaranteed the lives of many, and his spirit lives on in every measure taken to keep the darkness at bay. The final reflection on this history is one of profound respect for the resilience of the human heart when confronted with the incomprehensible. The story of Lucilla Brown is, at its core, a testament to the fact that while we cannot always control the violence that seeks us out, we can control how we respond to it, how we grow from it, and how we ensure that the light of our values continues to shine, even in the wake of our most devastating losses. The territory has emerged from this process not as a mirror of the violence that once broke it, but as a monument to the strength that was required to rise again. The vigilance of the present is the most fitting tribute to the service of the past, and as the future unfolds, the memory of the lieutenant will remain a quiet, steady presence, watching over the people he loved, now fully protected and profoundly aware of the price that was paid for the safety they hold today. His duty, once served in the humble lobby of a temporary building, has been elevated to an eternal role as the guardian of his people's resolve, a role he fulfills through the institutional strength and cultural maturity of the nation that he helped guide into a new and secure era. The story of American Samoa is no longer the story of a peaceful island living in a dream. It is the story of a courageous people living in the reality, fully prepared to defend the peace they have built, honoring the past, and embracing the future with eyes wide open, forever in the debt of the hero who first dared to stand alone in the storm. The culmination of this profound historical arc brings us to a place of sober reflection, where the tragedy of July 22, 2010, is no longer a bleeding wound but a foundational scar of the American Samoan experience. As we look back upon the life of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown and the transformative upheaval his death necessitated, we find that the true resolution of this story lies in the preservation of the territory's soul. The evolution from an unarmed, trust-based policing model to a modern, tactically prepared defensive system was never intended to displace the island's intrinsic spirit of communal respect. Rather, it was a necessary recalibration designed to ensure that such a spirit could survive in an age where the reach of violence has become global and indiscriminate. The narrative of this transition, from the fragility of a peaceful past to the guarded reality of the present, serves as a masterclass in societal adaptation. It is a testament to the fact that identity is not a static relic of the past, but a dynamic, evolving commitment to values that must be defended with the appropriate tools and the correct mindset. The memory of the lieutenant has become the standard by which all subsequent institutional growth is measured, ensuring that the department remains anchored in his selfless ethos even as it embraces the rigorous professionalization that his death made inevitable. Every aspect of contemporary law enforcement, from the precise tactical protocols in the training manuals to the daily, watchful presence of armed officers on the streets, is a reflection of the hard-won wisdom that safety is not merely a hope, but a disciplined operational necessity. The trauma, once an isolating and overwhelming burden, has been successfully integrated into the collective consciousness, becoming a source of institutional strength and a constant reminder of the fragility of the peace that the citizens enjoy. This integration is the hallmark of a mature society, one that has ceased to look away from its own vulnerabilities and has instead chosen to confront them with a resolve that is both rational and honorable. The persistent, quiet influence of the events at the GHC Reed building acts as a moral compass for the territory, guiding policymakers, officers, and civilians toward a future where the preservation of justice and the safety of the public are recognized as inseparable, mutually reinforcing responsibilities. The legacy of Lucilla Brown is thus an ongoing project, a living history that requires constant vigilance, sustained investment, and an unwavering commitment to the principles he served until his final breath. The transition that followed his passing was not just about the acquisition of firearms or the construction of secure facilities. It was about the maturation of the island's relationship with the world, a recognition that to maintain the beauty of their home, they must be willing to defend it with eyes wide open to the dangers of the modern reality. This newfound maturity has allowed the territory to navigate the subsequent years with a heightened awareness of its own worth and a deeper appreciation for the cost of its stability. The institutional memory of the assassination now serves as a prophylactic against the repetition of history, ensuring that the complacent lapses of the past are never permitted to undermine the structural integrity of the public safety apparatus again. In the hearts of the families who are directly affected, the path toward reconciliation has been a long and private journey, yet they have stood as pillars of grace, demonstrating a level of fortitude that has undoubtedly shaped the character of the entire island. Their capacity to forgive the individual while remaining resolute in the pursuit of justice for the crime has provided a blueprint for how a community can heal without sacrificing its moral clarity. The persistence of this narrative in the public discourse ensures that the sacrifice of the lieutenant is never trivialized or relegated to the margins of history, but remains a vital, active component of the island's civic identity. As the generations turn, the story of the man who stood unarmed in the face of absolute malice will continue to serve as the defining benchmark for what it means to be a servant of the public. He is the standard against which all courage is weighed, the emblem of the service-oriented values that the police force strives to uphold despite its newfound tactical capabilities. This synthesis of the old and the new, the traditional service heart and the modern defensive mind, represents the territory's highest achievement in the aftermath of the tragedy. The life that was taken has, in a sense, been multiplied by the commitment of the thousands who have pledged to uphold the standards he lived by. The resolution of this long, agonizing ordeal is not found in the finality of a prison sentence or the hardening of courthouse walls, but in the enduring, vibrant, and vigilant character of the society that emerged from the wreckage. The territory of American Samoa stands today as a testament to the reality that resilience is not the absence of trauma, but the ability to build upon it, and the ability to ensure that the light of one's values is never extinguished by the shadows of a single, horrific event. The narrative concludes with the affirmation that justice, once served, creates the foundation upon which a community can move forward with eyes fixed on the horizon, fully aware of the price paid for their security, and profoundly dedicated to ensuring that the dead is honored through a perpetual state of readiness, honor, and service. The journey from that July morning to this present, stable day has been a defining odyssey, one that has forged a people who are no longer passive observers of their own destiny, but active defenders of their peace. As the legacy of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is carried into the future, it is sustained by the collective resolve of a territory that has looked into the darkness of its own vulnerability and chosen, in his name, to stand forever in the light. This is the ultimate, final testament of the case, that the courage of one individual, when met by the commitment of a society, can redefine the future, turning an act of senseless violence into a permanent cornerstone of institutional integrity and communal strength. His memory is the silent sentinel that watches over the island, the invisible, steadying hand that guides the force toward excellence, and the eternal, quiet whisper that reminds the citizenry that they are the owners of their peace, and that they possess the strength to hold it against any threat. The cycle of the tragedy is broken, replaced by the cycle of service and protection, and it is here, in this enduring, honorable, and steadfast state of vigilance, that the final piece of Lucilla Brown is found, not in the cessation of his work, but in the perfection of the mission he began, now carried forward by a community that has become, in his image, the guardians of its own enduring, hard-won, and securely defended future. The story is complete, not in the sense of being forgotten, but in the sense of being fully realized, a permanent, indelible part of the island's history, and a testament to the fact that justice and honor are the only true shields against the fleeting power of malice. Every day, as the sun rises over the emerald landscape of the islands, it illuminates a society that is not just peaceful by tradition, but peaceful by choice, protected by the vigilant, equipped, and dedicated force that emerged from the shadow of that July day to become the ultimate, honorable manifestation of the life that was given for their collective, enduring safety and their permanent, sovereign right to exist in tranquility. This is the final truth, the immutable legacy of the detective, and the eternal promise of the people he served until the end, a promise kept in every hour of every day, as they walk the path of their history with their heads held high, ever mindful of the sacrifice, and eternally committed to the duty that he set for them, now and for all the generations to come, as they continue to live in the light of his memory and the strength of the peace he helped them to secure. As we arrive at the final threshold of this extended meditation on loss, duty, and institutional rebirth, the narrative of Detective Lieutenant Lucilla Brown finds its ultimate rest not in the sterile finality of a courtroom decree, but in the vibrant, ongoing life of the territory he so profoundly shaped. The history of American Samoa, split into the eras before and after the events of July 22, 2010, is a testament to the fact that progress is often forged in the fires of unavoidable catastrophe. The metamorphosis of the law enforcement apparatus from a symbolic presence to an active, equipped defense force was not merely an administrative shift. It was a fundamental reassertion of the territory's right to self-preservation in a world that had become increasingly hostile to the innocence they once cultivated. The memory of the lieutenant acts as the invisible tether, keeping the department anchored to the core values of service, humility, and community engagement even as it adopts the tactical, hard-edged capabilities necessary to confront modern threats. This dual identity, the officer as both the empathetic community partner and the prepared tactical defender, is the primary inheritance of the tragedy, a complex but necessary synthesis that has allowed the island to mature into a more secure version of itself. The institutional maturity displayed by the government in the years since the assassination has been nothing short of extraordinary. It has required a move away from the comforts of traditional reliance and toward the rigorous demands of professional autonomy. This journey has not been without its critics or its moments of deep internal doubt, but the overarching trajectory has remained clear. The territory has moved toward a model of governance that prioritizes the sanctity of the public safety institution, understanding now that the stability of their home is an active, ongoing effort. The GHC Reed building, once the site of such unimaginable carnage, has been reclaimed by the narrative of the territory as a place where the people learned to harden their hearts against violence without losing their capacity for love and communal solidarity. The story of Lucilla Brown is, therefore, the story of a society that has successfully navigated the most difficult transition of its modern history, choosing to honor the past by securing the future rather than being held captive by the ghosts of what was lost. The resilience of the survivors, the wounded officers, and the bereaved family remains the most powerful argument for the necessity of this transformation. Their endurance, their refusal to let bitterness dictate their lives, and their unwavering support for the institutional changes that followed the murder have provided the moral clarity that the territory needed to move forward. They are the living evidence that justice, while cold and clinical in its application, can serve as a vessel for healing, provided that the intent behind the process is the pursuit of a lasting and honorable truth. The community's continued adherence to the memory of the detective ensures that the standards of the police force remain under constant, constructive scrutiny, not by a public that is cynical, but by a public that understands the profound nature of the commitment their officers make every single day. This is a unique and precious relationship, one that is built on the foundation of shared grief and forged into a bond of shared responsibility. Looking toward the future, the territory remains vigilant, never again assuming that the tranquility of their surroundings is a guarantee of safety. This state of perpetual, responsible readiness is the most significant tribute to Lucilla Brown, as it represents the realization of the safety that he was denied while he served. His legacy is not a static object, but a living force that informs the training, the mindset, and the heart of every person tasked with protecting the island. The transformation of the legal system, the modernization of the court infrastructure, and the hardening of the security protocols are all physical embodiments of the lessons etched into the collective memory by the lieutenant's final act of service. He stood in that lobby as a man of peace in an era of peace, and his death forced the territory to accept the reality of the era of vigilance. Yet, in that acceptance, they have not become a society of suspicion. They have become a society of awareness. They have learned to see the world as it truly is, while retaining their unique cultural identity and their fierce commitment to the traditions that make their islands a home. The resolution of this long, epic narrative is found in the simple, everyday reality of life in the territory today. The patrol car that passes, the officer who walks the beat, and the citizen who goes about their business, all existing within a framework of security that is both real and reliable. The shadow of the tragedy has been turned into the light of institutional strength, ensuring that the void left by the fallen lieutenant is filled with the resilience of an entire nation. The narrative of this tragedy concludes with a sense of profound, hard-won peace, a peace that is not the absence of the possibility of conflict, but the presence of the strength to resolve it. This is the ultimate gift of Lucilla Brown to his people. He became the catalyst for their strength, the mirror for their reflection, and the eternal guardian of their resolves. His life and death have become the defining narrative of the island's modern identity, ensuring that no matter how much the world may change, the people of American Samoa will always have the internal compass provided by his sacrifice to guide them through the darkness. The era of innocence may be gone, but the era of honor has taken its place, and it is in this honorable state that the memory of the detective is truly and permanently settled, held in the heart of the territory, defended by the strength of its laws, and honored by the lives of all those who now walk in the security he helped to build. As the final pages of this story are turned, we are left with the image of a community that has emerged from the storm, not broken, but refined, standing together in the steady, enduring light of its own, carefully guarded and profoundly cherished tranquility. The duty of the storyteller is now done, but the duty of the community continues, an eternal, vigilant commitment to the peace that they have chosen, defended, and now, finally, mastered in the name of the one who paved the way. Lucilla Brown remains the watchman, the symbol, and the heart of this transformation, forever the detective who taught his people the final, necessary truth about their place in the world, that the safety of the many is the ultimate reward for the courage of the one. The story ends not in the silence of the lobby, but in the vibrant, continuous, and secure life of the islands he protected, and it is in this continuity that his sacrifice finds its highest expression and his spirit its ultimate, well-deserved, and eternal home, forever woven into the history, the law, and the very identity of the territory he loved and for which he gave his everything. The light that he sparked in his death continues to guide the way, an everlasting beacon that ensures that the path forward is always one of safety, honor, and sovereign, unshakable peace, held in the hands of the people who have learned that their greatest strength is found when they stand together, united in the memory of the past and the unwavering commitment to a future that is, at long last, their own to protect and their own to fully and safely embrace.